Since 2012, Kenya's sole electricity distribution company has been losing over 18% of the power it buys. In 2015, when the government announced plans to aggressively expand grid power access, those losses jumped to nearly 20%. Kenya Power, nonetheless, has a very ambitious plan. Ever since then, it wants to connect 9.5 million people to the grid by 2020. Earlier on, I asked the company's CEO, Tarus, if that was even possible.
It's true. If you look at the trend over the last 4 or 5 years, we have been seeing a downward trend as far as system losses are concerned. But of course, we must appreciate the fact that we have been adding an additional 1.2 million customers into the grid. And when you look at those areas, those additions basically, it involves extension of both the HT and the LV lines. Now, of course, as you extend the lines, you are increasing the capacity of losses. But the increase in the loss levels has not been that significant.
Your target is to have 9 million people on the grid by 2020.
9.5.
9.5. So that essentially means you need to add in between 1.2, 1.5 million people every year between now and 2020. Inevitably, you're extending more wires, more cables all over the place, system losses will be there. But at the same time, the regulator is telling you, keep your losses down to 15.9%. These two things seem to be in contradiction to each other.
Of course, but it is important to appreciate the fact that, once those loss points have been identified, like for example, some of the things we are doing is to say, can we carry out metering at transformers so that at a given transformer, we should be able to say this transformer received so many units and so many units were sold out of this transformer. So what is the loss arising from identifying them that way? Then it allows us to attack the highest loss points.
All things considered though, if you're expanding at that speed for the next 3 or 4 years, can you afford it? Because ultimately, on top of that, you've got 1 million people onto the grid every year. You've got system losses this high. Your net profits have been relatively flat for the last fiscal year. On top of that, the regulator has actually denied 2 suggestions, or rather 2 applications to raise prices from you in 2017 and in 2016. It seems like you're backed into a corner. On one hand, your revenue is essentially static, but you have this imperative to expand grid access. Can you actually do it without going broke?
No, I think, let me set the record straight. Of course, when the desire to connect, to attain universal access by the year 2020 was mooted, government came up with a program which brought on board, resources, the famous last mile program. And as it is, KPLC is just an implementing agency on behalf of government.
Wait, so let me get this straight. So that 45 billion or so shillings, about $450 million that the government borrowed from the World Bank and the AFDB, that's not on your books?
No, it's not on our books.
So whose books is it on? Is it Treasury or Ministry of Energy?
This is on government, well, Treasury.
Treasury. Right, so you don't have any direct debt exposure to that particular problem?
No, we are just an implementing agent.
But what about the other side of the equation when government comes in and says you have to give connections but at below cost? Because in some cases we noticed back when the last mile connection was actually put up, the price of actually getting jacked into the grid was actually reduced below the essentially cost of what it would actually cost you as KPLC to go in there, put up a pole, string a line from A to B. What about those losses? Aren't those on your books?
No, well, it's basically the same thing. We are saying connect customers at 15,000 shillings, perhaps from an actual cost of say 75 or so. So the differential then is taken care of by these facilities coming through government.